You mentioned the portfolio a little bit. I guess tell me what does that portfolio mix look like for you guys in terms of how much on smaller bets, how much on bigger like feature bets?
It depends on when you talk about in the story of Duolingo. So when the growth team started, it was about 2 years ago. We definitely were looking for low-hanging fruits, and I wanted to get quick wins to motivate the team and to prove the worth of what we were doing.
Yeah.
So then small iterative things make a lot of sense, and that means like, let's see what happens if we had a badge here. Let's like the change copy of like notification. Let's change the screen. Let's make the blue green, like whatever, and you get 1%, 2%, and those are great wins, and you start seeing results for that. And when I say 1%, 2%, I'm talking about DAUs, although we also really care about retention. D1, D7, D14 is what we normally look at, and then also session starts and session ends, which is number of lessons started and number of lessons completed. So those are like normally the metrics we look at, and then how this impacts monetization, which is, by the way, another, I think, problem, because things that retention and monetization often go like against each other. Things that help users stick around are not things like, I can talk about more of that later, but that's definitely like a problem that we have. But at the same time, in the company, we have people working on big bets. So for example, we have the chat bot. So we have a team that's dedicated to that. We have like different, we have a social thing called clubs. We have a team dedicated to that. But even within the growth team, if we only do that at some point, it's just kind of diminishing returns. So normally what I was trying to do was like one big bet a quarter, like 1 or 2 maximum big bets a quarter, and then like kind of little bets, so that like if those 1 or 2 big bets failed by the end of the quarter, we would still have results to show. At this point, I just don't think that the little bets are doing it for us anymore, and we have to take the risks. And so you just have to do what's right for your product and the size that it is and how much you can accrue from each experiment.
I mean, what was that turning point? Like, was there just like did you start to see like a diminishing returns on the small bets, like more failures or stuff like that? Or was it more of like a gut-driven decision of like, this starts to feel like we need to take higher risk things?
Yeah, I think it was a good thing. We're like, I think like this is not really, we're getting the 1%, we're getting the 2%, and I don't feel like it's moving the needle at the rate that I think we should be. And I think that we've also come to a point where I think our team is trained enough that I think we're ready for the bigger bets. Like we know how to prioritize things, we know how to like simplify concepts, we know how to do like V1 designs, V2 designs, we already know how to negotiate with the design team to like allow that to pass through, even though it's like not exactly what they want it to be, just because we're trying to move quickly. So now we're ready to like look at those bigger concepts. But it was probably a gut thing.
So I guess even when you're running the small experiments, I guess talk to me about how you make sure the team is running meaningful experiments, because the size of the experiment and like how meaningful it can be doesn't necessarily equate.
Right. And so that's a question you have to be asking yourself all the time and revisiting. And so what we're doing right now in the team is we have 30 to 60 minutes set aside the week before the next sprint. So we have sprints at Duolingo. We do 1 to 2 week sprints. Do I have to explain what that is?
No.
Okay. And before that, or like the week before, we sit and we look, okay, what is coming up next week that we had identified as top priority for like coming up next? What is this engineering working on? What is this designer working on? Do we still think that that's the highest priority thing that they can do? Like, do we need to revisit what we think the ROI is going to be? Are there other ideas in here that we think are more important than what we're doing now? And sometimes our CEO sits into those discussions too, because he really cares.
Yeah, so you guys are doing it on a weekly basis, so reviewing that. So, and you mentioned like the analysis step of like really like stopping and making sure you do the analysis of the experiment. Can you tell me like what the team does to like properly analyze an experiment?
We're constantly improving. We have very strong engineers at Duolingo. It's a very strong, like a engineering focused organization, which helps a lot. So we have, normally our engineer will write the experiment analysis. And then we have an experiment reviewer, which is someone in another team, normally like another engineer, who actually goes through the whole analysis, make sure it makes sense. The PM in the team also goes through the analysis, make sure it makes sense, and then we discuss. The engineer makes a recommendation like, based on this data, I recommend launch, or I recommend kill, or launch and iterate, or kill and iterate, or whatever. And then we have multiple points of like looking at that and saying like, okay, does this make sense? And that's a really good way of like, we leave comments on like Google Doc, like even the head of engineering like will leave the comments like, are you sure about this? This makes sense. Did you look at this metric? Like, and just kind of working together on that, because it's very easy to miss something if you just have one person writing it up and moving forward. And importantly, one thing that we started doing also kind of somewhat late in the game for our team is like actually paying attention to once something fails, like when we have an experiment that fails, which is often, actually looking at why. Why did that fail? And we won't always know, but I think that it's important to have that discussion as a whole team. So we have the engineer go through his analysis. This is why it failed, and then we talk about why we think it failed and how we think this impacts other ideas that we've had, or like other ideas that we're thinking of working on, and how we can learn from that experience.